They thought humans were legends, until an armada of 10,000 enemy dreadnoughts appear. Part 1. The galaxy was calm that morning, or as calm as a galaxy full of 1,000 different worlds could ever be. On the edge of known space, past the bright core worlds and the busy trade lanes, there was a quiet system called Verath. It had 3 moons, a soft blue sun, and a space station that watched the stars for trouble. Nobody expected trouble that day. That was the problem with trouble. It never sent a warning. Inside the station, called Watchpost 11, a young officer named Ren Doss sat at his console. He was not human. He was Dravith, a tall insect-like being with 4 thin arms and large black eyes that could see in the dark. His people had joined the coalition of free worlds 300 years ago, long after the old wars had ended. Ren had grown up hearing stories about those wars, but they felt like old myths to him, like tales told to scare children into behaving. One of those myths was about humans. They say humans could destroy a whole fleet with one ship, his grandmother used to tell him. They say they fought a war against a horror from the deep dark, and won, though it cost them almost everything. Then they closed their doors and never came out again. Ren never believed it. Nobody his age truly believed it. Humans were a story now, not a people. Most star charts did not even show where their home system was anymore. Some said Earth was destroyed. Some said humans had left the galaxy entirely. Some said they never existed at all, and the whole legend was made up by an old government to scare enemies away. It made for good bedtime stories, but nothing more. Ren's shift was almost over when his sensor board lit up bright red. He blinked. Sensors did not just light up like that. He tapped the screen, thinking it was some kind of error, but the numbers did not change. Far out, past the edge of the system, something massive had entered the sensor range. Not one ship, not 10 ships, thousands. Station command, this is Watchpost 11, Ren said into his comm, trying to keep his voice steady. I am reading a large contact at the edge of scanner range. Repeat, a very large contact. There was a pause. Then a voice answered, sounding annoyed, as if this was some kind of joke. Define large, Watchpost 11. Ren looked at the numbers again. He wanted them to be wrong. He wanted this to be a sensor glitch, a flock of space rocks, anything but what the screen was telling him. 10,000, he said. The count is 10,000 ships. And command, they are not small ships. Every single one of them is reading as Dreadnought class or larger. Silence. Watchpost 11. Confirm that number, the voice said, no longer sounding annoyed. Now it sounded afraid. Confirmed, Ren said. 10,000 Dreadnoughts, bearing directly for Verath. Far away, on the coalition capital world of Halven, a woman named High Marshal Illyra Sen was in the middle of a budget meeting when the alert came through. Illyra was Cathari, a species that looked mostly human except for pale silver skin and eyes that shifted color with mood. She had spent 30 years in the coalition fleet, and in that time she had seen pirates, small border wars, and a handful of nasty diseases that spread through refugee ships. She had never seen anything like what was now on her screen. She stood up so fast her chair fell backward. Get me every fleet commander in this sector, she said. Now. Within an hour, the leaders of the coalition of free worlds were gathered in the war room, a large circular chamber, with a floating star map in the center. The map showed Verath's system, and crawling toward it, a red mass of dots so thick it looked like a stain spreading across the display. This cannot be real, said Ambassador Vex Taloran, a Dravith diplomat with a reputation for calm words and careful thinking. Even he looked shaken now. 10,000 ships. No fleet in recorded history has ever been that large. Who could build such a thing? The Skarn Legion, said Illyra grimly. We have had scattered reports for years. Raids on the outer colonies. Missing supply ships. We thought it was pirates. We were wrong. The Skarn Legion is a myth used to frighten cadets, snapped another officer, a stout Torvain general named Brooke Hallis. A gang of raiders, nothing more. This cannot be them. Then explain the fleet on that screen, Illyra said quietly. Nobody could. The Skarn Legion was, in fact, real, though very few people in the coalition understood how real, or how dangerous. They came from a cluster of dead worlds far beyond coalition space. worlds that had been stripped of everything useful long ago. The Skarn did not build, they did not grow, they took. Every world they touched, they emptied, and every people they conquered, they either destroyed or turned into slaves who mined and built weapons for the next war. For centuries, they had been quietly growing in the dark, far from coalition eyes, gathering ships, gathering slaves, gathering hate. Now they were done hiding. Their leader was a being called Warlord Dross Kale, a massive armored figure whose face had not been seen by anyone who lived to tell about it. Dross Kale did not care about diplomacy, or trade, or peace. He cared about conquest. And he had heard, from spies and captured slaves, that somewhere in this section of the galaxy there was a soft, wealthy alliance of many small, weak species, ripe for the taking, the coalition of free worlds. He also heard something else, a rumor, a myth, a story about a species called humans, who had once been powerful enough to be feared by everyone, and who had vanished long ago. Dross Kale did not believe in myths. He believed in fleets, and numbers, and steel. 10,000 dreadnoughts was more steel than anyone in this part of the galaxy had ever seen. He was not afraid of ghost stories. That was his first mistake. Back on Halven, the war room was in chaos. Reports were coming in faster than anyone could read them. The Skarn fleet had reached Varath. Watchpost 11 had gone silent less than 10 minutes after their last transmission. The 3 moons of Varath, home to nearly 2 million coalition citizens, had stopped answering any calls at all. They didn't even try to negotiate, Ambassador Vex said, staring at the map in horror. They just erased it. What forces do we have that can reach the border in time to slow them down? Illyra asked. A younger officer pulled up fleet positions. The numbers were not good. The entire standing coalition fleet, gathered from every member world, numbered around 400 capital ships. 400 against 10,000. It was not a battle. It was a slaughter waiting to happen. We need to call for help, Vex said. From who? General Hallis snapped. There is no one bigger than us in this region. We are the biggest alliance in 100 light years. Vex was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made the whole room go still. There is one old treaty, from before any of us were born. It was signed after the Coalition helped human survivors during their darkest years, long before we knew what they truly were. In exchange, humanity promised that if the Coalition ever faced destruction, they would come. Humans are gone, Ambassador, Hallis said. They vanished centuries ago. Nobody has heard from them in generations. It's a fairy tale. Maybe, Vex said. But right now, a fairy tale is the only hope we have left. Illyra looked at the star map, at the red stain spreading closer with every passing minute, and made a decision that would be remembered for the rest of history. Send the signal, she said. Send it to every last known coordinate we have for human space. If they are still out there, if there is any truth to the old stories, then we need them, now. The signal traveled through the dark for 3 days before it reached anything at all. It passed empty systems, dead relay stations, and old trade routes nobody had used in 100 years. Most in the war room believed it would simply vanish into the void, unanswered, like every other attempt to contact humanity over the last 2 centuries. But this time, something was different. On the far edge of the galaxy, past a wall of nebula clouds that few ships dared to cross, there was a system that did not appear on any coalition star chart. It was hidden behind old defense fields, cloaking technology, and a thick belt of asteroids seeded with sensors. This was Sol System. This was Earth. Humanity had not vanished. They had not been destroyed. They had simply gone quiet, rebuilding after a war so terrible that most humans alive today only knew it through history lessons and old memorials. That war had been against something even the Skarn Legion would have feared, a hive-based enemy known only as the Devourer Swarm, and it had cost humanity nearly everything. 90% of the human population, gone. Entire fleets, gone. Colonies turned to dust. But humanity had won. And in winning, they had learned something important. Strength without caution gets you killed twice as fast. So they rebuilt, quietly, carefully. They grew their fleets again, developed new weapons, trained new generations of soldiers who had never seen war, but respected it deeply because of what their grandparents had told them. They watched the stars. They waited. And when the old alarm signal reached Earth's deep space relay, an alarm that had not gone off in over 200 years, the entire planet went on alert within the hour. In a command bunker beneath what used to be called North America, an old admiral named Marcus Cade received the message personally. He was 61 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by old scars from battles most people alive had only read about in history books. He read the message twice. "They're asking for help," he said quietly to the officers around him. "The coalition. 10,000 enemy dreadnoughts. Verath's system has already fallen." The room went silent. 10,000 ships was a number that made even seasoned officers pale. "Sir," said a young captain named Elena Voss, standing near the door. "Do we answer?" Marcus Cade looked at the old treaty on his screen, signed generations ago by people long dead, a promise made in humanity's darkest hour, when a small alliance of strangers had given his ancestors food, fuel, and shelter without asking for anything in return. A promise like that did not expire just because time had passed. "We made an oath," he said. "Humanity does not break its oaths." He turned to the room, and his voice grew louder, carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything. "Sound the fleet call. Every ship, every crew. We are going to war." Word spread through Earth and its colonies faster than anyone expected. In cities and space stations across the solar system, alarms rang out, calling reservists back to duty, calling old veterans out of retirement, calling young recruits who had trained for years without ever expecting to actually fight. Nobody complained. Nobody hesitated. This was what they had been preparing for, even if they never truly believed it would happen. At the Mars shipyards, massive doors opened, revealing warships that had sat quiet for decades, kept ready just in case. Engineers swarmed over them, checking every system, waking up engines that had been sleeping since before most of the crew were even born. On Earth, in training centers around the globe, soldiers packed their gear and said goodbye to families who understood, without being told twice, that this was serious. Elena Voss stood on the deck of her ship, the ISS Valiant Sun, watching the crew rush to their stations. She had trained for this moment her entire career, but nothing could have prepared her for the size of the threat they were about to face. 10,000 enemy ships. She had commanded battle groups before, fought off pirate raids and border skirmishes, but this was something else entirely. Admiral Cade walked up beside her, watching the same scene. "Scared?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. 10,000 ships is a lot, sir." "It is," Cade agreed. "But let me tell you something. The old stories don't always get right. We didn't win the last war because we had more ships. We had fewer, far fewer. We won because we understood something our enemy didn't. War is not just about numbers. It's about will and knowledge and knowing exactly where to strike." Elena looked out at the stars, thinking about the coalition, a group of people she had never met, in a part of the galaxy she had never seen, who were about to be wiped out unless humanity arrived in time. "How long until we reach Verath, sir?" she asked. Cade checked the data on his tablet, calculating jump distances and fleet assembly times. "If we push the engines hard, 6 days," he said. "The coalition might not have 6 days." "Then we'd better not waste any time," Elena said. Cade nodded, a grim look crossing his weathered face. "Signal the fleet," he said. "Tell them humanity is coming, and tell them to bring everything we have." Back at Halvan, the war room had grown darker with every passing hour. More reports came in, each one worse than the last. The Skarn fleet had not stopped at Verath. It had split into several massive groups, each one large enough to crush entire star systems on its own, and those groups were now spreading out across coalition space like a disease. Millions of refugees were fleeing toward the capital, filling every ship, every station, every safe harbor they could find. The coalition fleet, small as it was, had been ordered to hold defensive positions at key choke points, buying time, though everyone in that war room knew it was mostly a delaying tactic. 400 ships could not stop 10,000. They could only slow them down, and die trying. Ambassador Vex Taloran stood near the edge of the star map, watching the red stain grow larger every hour, and felt something he had never felt before in his long career as a diplomat. True, cold fear. "Any response from the humans?" he asked quietly. Illyra checked her console, hoping, praying for good news. For 3 long days there had been nothing. Silence. The same silence that had answered every human hail for the past 200 years. Then, on the 4th day, her console lit up with a new signal. A single message, sent from coordinates that had never appeared on any chart she had ever seen. She opened it and read it aloud to the room, her voice trembling. "Coalition of Free Worlds. This is Admiral Marcus Cade, of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call. The old treaty stands. Humanity has not forgotten its promise. Hold your positions. Help is coming. Do not give up hope. We are already on our way." The war room erupted, some cheering, some crying, all of them feeling, for the first time in days, a flicker of hope in the dark. But Ambassador Vex Taloran was not celebrating. He was staring at the star map, at the massive red stain of 10,000 enemy dreadnoughts closing in from every direction, and he was wondering if hope alone would be enough. Because whatever was coming, whatever humanity truly was after 200 years of silence, it would need to be more than just a legend. It would need to be real. The Coalition fleet held the line at a system called Threshold Gate, a rocky junction of trade routes that connected the outer colonies to the capital worlds. It was not much to look at, just a handful of gas giants and a busy space station, but it was important. If the Skarn Legion broke through Threshold Gate, there would be nothing standing between them and Halvan itself. General Brooke Hallis commanded the defense there, with 200 ships under his flag, the largest single fleet the Coalition had ever assembled. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the ironclad Vow, watching the sensor readings with a heavy heart. The Skarn fleet group heading their way was not the full 10,000, thankfully. Scouts reported it was closer to 800 dreadnoughts, split off from the main force to punch through the choke point. 800 against 200, still terrible odds, but not the impossible ones from before. "They will be in weapons range within the hour," his tactical officer reported. Hallis nodded slowly. "Signal all ships. Hold formation. We fight here, or the whole Coalition falls." The battle that followed would later be remembered as one of the bloodiest in Coalition history. The Skarn dreadnoughts came in like a wall of black metal, firing weapons that tore through Coalition shields as if they were made of paper. Ship after ship lit up and died in the dark, crews screaming over comm channels before going silent forever. Hallis watched his fleet burn around him, ship by ship, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. By the time the enemy finally pulled back, having taken heavy losses of their own, only 40 Coalition ships remained. 40 out of 200. Threshold Gate had held. Barely, but the cost had been almost too much to bear. "Get me casualty numbers," Hallis said quietly, his voice hollow. Nobody wanted to answer him. The numbers were too terrible to say out loud. News of the battle reached Halvan within hours, and it hit the war room like a physical blow. Illyra Sen stared at the reports, at the list of ships lost, at the names of officers and crews who would never come home, and felt something inside her break just a little. "They held the line," Vex said quietly, trying to find something good in the terrible news. "Threshold Gate is still ours." "For now," Illyra said, "but we lost 80% of our fleet doing it, and that was just one part of the Skarn force, less than a tenth of their total strength. If they send more, we won't be able to hold anywhere." The bigger problem was clear to everyone in that room. The Skarn Legion was not attacking as one giant fleet. They had split into many groups, striking at a dozen different systems all at once, spreading the Coalition's already thin defenses even thinner. It was smart. It was cruel. And it was working. Reports poured in from all across Coalition space. The colony world of Drenmore, home to nearly 5 million people, had gone silent after a Skarn fleet arrived in orbit. The trading hub of Corvassa Station had been boarded and stripped of every scrap of technology before being left to drift, empty and dead. Refugee ships clogged every available space lane, desperate to reach somewhere, anywhere, that felt safe. "How long until the humans arrive?" Vex asked. Illyra checked the timeline they had received. 2 more days, if their timing holds. 2 days, Vex repeated. "Can we survive 2 more days?" Nobody in the room could answer that question with any confidence. Aboard the human flagship, the ISS Endless Horizon, Admiral Marcus Cade stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak past as the fleet pushed its engines to the limit. Behind him and around him, in a formation that stretched for hundreds of kilometers, flew the largest human fleet assembled since the war against the Devourer swarm 2 centuries ago. There were older ships in that fleet, veterans of past conflicts, kept in careful repair over the decades just in case a day like this ever came. There were newer ships too, built using technology and knowledge passed down from the survivors of the old war, weapons and shields far more advanced than anything the Coalition had ever seen. And there were the crews, a mix of grizzled veterans who remembered old battles, and young recruits who had trained their whole lives for a war they never truly believed would come. Captain Elena Voss walked onto the bridge and saluted. "Status report, Admiral," she said. "We're 2 days out from Coalition capital space," Cade said, "but the Skarn fleet has already split up and is hitting multiple systems. Command wants us to divide our own fleet to respond to the worst threats." Elena frowned. "Divide us? Sir, we don't even know how strong this Skarn Legion truly is. Splitting up against an unknown enemy feels risky." "I agree," Cade said, "which is why I'm not doing that. We fight together, as one fleet, and we hit the head of the snake, not its many tails. If the Coalition's information is right, the Skarn command fleet, the one with their warlord aboard, is moving toward Halvan itself. We intercept there. We cut off the head, and the rest of the body falls apart." "That's a big gamble, sir," Elena said. "War is always a gamble," Cade replied. "The trick is making sure the other side gambles worse than you do." He turned to the fleet-wide comm and opened a channel to every ship under his command. "This is Admiral Cade to the fleet. I know many of you have never seen real combat before. I know the stories our grandparents told us about the last war feel like ancient history to some of you. But today, those stories become real again. Out there, alliance of people we have never met are dying because an enemy believes they are weak and alone. We are not going to let that happen. Humanity does not abandon its friends. Hold formation, trust your training, and remember, we did not survive the darkest war in our history by being reckless. We survived by being smart, and by fighting together." Cade out. The bridge crew exchanged looks, some nervous, some determined, all of them feeling the weight of what was coming. 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and worry. Every hour brought new reports of Skarn attacks across Coalition space, each one worse than the last. The war room on Halvan had become a place of constant tension, officers working in shifts around the clock, trying to coordinate a defense that felt more and more like a slow retreat with every passing hour. Then, on the morning of the 3rd day, sensors at the edge of Halvan's system picked up something new. "Contact," a young sensor officer called out, her voice shaking. "Large contact, entering system range." Elira's heart sank. Had the Skarn command fleet arrived already? Had the humans failed to reach them in time? "Identify," she ordered, bracing herself for the worst. The officer stared at her screen, blinking in confusion. It's not Skarn signatures, ma'am. The energy readings are completely different." "I've never seen anything like this." Ambassador Vex rushed to the console, looking over the officer's shoulder. On the screen, a new formation of ships was appearing at the edge of the system, sleek and powerful looking, moving with a precision that spoke of long discipline and hard-won experience. "Open a channel," Vex said quickly. "Hail them." A moment later, a voice came through the comm system, calm and steady, carrying an accent none of them had ever heard before. "Coalition of Free Worlds, this is Admiral Marcus Cade of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call for help. Apologies for the delay. Humanity is here." The entire war room fell silent, then erupted into stunned murmurs. After 200 years, after generations of stories and myths and doubts, humanity had finally returned. Elira stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly as she responded. "Admiral Cade, this is High Marshal Elira Sen. On behalf of the Coalition of Free Worlds, thank you. We did not know if you would truly answer." "We keep our promises," Cade replied simply. "Now, bring me up to speed on the situation. Where is the Skarn command fleet, and how bad is it?" Elira quickly relayed everything they knew. The Skarn Legion had split into at least a dozen major groups, striking colonies and choke points across coalition space. Their best intelligence suggested the main command fleet, roughly 3,000 dreadnoughts strong and carrying warlord Dross Kale himself, was 3 days out from Halven, moving slowly, methodically, crushing everything in its path. 3,000 ships, Cade repeated, processing the number. And how many do you have left to defend the capital? Illyra hesitated. 60 ships, Admiral. What's left of our reserve fleet? There was a long pause on the comm line. Understood, Cade finally said. We have 300 ships in this fleet. It will not be enough to fight 3,000 dreadnoughts head-on, not in open battle, but it will be enough to change how this war is fought. Marshal Sen, I need everything you have on Skarn ship designs, their weapons, their tactics, anything at all your scouts have gathered. Of course, Illyra said. But Admiral, if I may ask, how do you plan to fight a fleet 10 times your size? There was something in Cade's voice when he answered, a quiet confidence that came from experience, from having faced impossible odds before and finding a way through anyway. The last time humanity faced an enemy fleet larger than our own, he said, we did not win by matching their numbers. We won by understanding something they never expected, that a smaller, smarter fleet can beat a larger, clumsy one, if you choose your battles carefully. Get me that intelligence, Marshal, and gather every ship you have left. We're going to need every advantage we can find. Over the next several hours, human and coalition officers worked side by side for the first time in 2 centuries, sharing information, comparing ship designs, and building a plan. It was strange for both sides. The coalition officers had grown up thinking of humans as ghosts from old stories, and now here they were, real and solid and full of quiet competence. The human officers, meanwhile, were seeing an alliance of many different species working together, something Earth's own history had rarely managed, even among its own people. Elena Voss found herself working closely with Ambassador Vex Toloran, going over old battle reports from the Threshold Gate fight. Your fleet fought bravely, she said, looking over the casualty numbers. 40 ships surviving against 800, that's not nothing. It felt like nothing when we were living through it, Vex admitted. We lost so many. General Hallis has not spoken more than a few words since the battle ended. I understand, Elena said gently. Losing people under your command never gets easier. But you held the line. That bought us time to get here. That mattered. Vex looked at her curiously. May I ask you something, Captain? The old stories say humanity fought a war against something even worse than the Skarn Legion. Something called the Devourer Swarm. Is that true? Elena's expression grew distant, remembering stories she had heard from her own grandmother, a survivor of that terrible war. It's true, she said quietly. The swarm did not want territory or slaves, or resources like the Skarn seemed to want. They wanted to consume everything, every world, every living thing. We fought them for almost 20 years. By the end, 9 out of every 10 humans alive at the start of that war were gone. Entire cities, entire colonies, wiped from existence. How did you win? Vex asked. We learned, Elena said. We learned how they thought, how they moved, how they fought. We stopped trying to match their numbers and started using every advantage we had, every scrap of knowledge, every clever trick. And in the end, we won, but it nearly broke us. That's why we went quiet after the war. We needed time to heal, to rebuild, without drawing the attention of anything else out there in the dark that might want to finish what the swarm started. Vex was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry you had to live through something like that. We survived, Elena said. And now maybe that terrible lesson can help save your people too. As the human and coalition fleets prepared together at Halven, far across coalition space, Warlord Dross Kale sat aboard his massive flagship, the Devourer's Fist, reviewing reports from his scattered fleet groups. The conquest was proceeding well. Colony after colony had fallen with barely any resistance. His scouts reported that the coalition capital, Halven, was down to a mere 60 defending ships. Then a new report arrived, one that made even Dross Kale pause. My lord, said his second-in-command, a scarred Skarn officer named Threx Morin. Our scouts report a new fleet has arrived at Halven, approximately 300 ships, unknown origin. 300 ships changes nothing, Droskale rumbled, his voice deep and cold. We have 10 times that number in the command fleet alone. Who are these newcomers? Threx hesitated. The ship designs match nothing in our records, my lord, but our informants among the captured slaves whisper a name: humans. Droskale went very still. Humans, he repeated slowly. The old myth, the ghost species that supposedly vanished 2 centuries ago. It seems the myth has returned, my lord, Threx said carefully. For a long moment, Droskale said nothing, considering this new information. He had heard whispers of humanity before, old stories passed down through generations of slaves and conquered peoples, tales of a species that had once fought and won against something so terrible it made even hardened Skarn warriors uneasy to speak of it. He had always dismissed such stories as exaggeration, the kind of myth that grows larger with every retelling. But 300 ships had appeared out of nowhere, at exactly the moment the coalition needed saving most. That was not the behavior of a myth. That was the behavior of something real. Increase our approach speed, Droskale finally said. I want the command fleet at Halven within 2 days, not 3. If these humans truly are what the old stories claim, I would rather crush them quickly, before they have time to prepare, than give them the chance to become a real problem. As you command, my lord, Threx said, bowing slightly, before hurrying off to relay the orders. Droskale turned back to his viewport, staring out at the endless dark of space, and for the first time in a very long conquest, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: uncertainty. 3,000 dreadnoughts were coming for Halven, and coming faster now. The question that remained was whether 300 human ships, no matter how legendary their history, could possibly be enough to stop them. 2 days, that was all the time humanity and the coalition had before the Skarn command fleet, now moving faster than expected, would arrive at Halven. 2 days to prepare a defense against 3,000 dreadnoughts using barely 400 combined ships. On paper, it looked impossible. Admiral Marcus Cade did not believe in impossible, but he did believe in hard truths, and the hard truth was that a straight, head-on battle would end in disaster, no matter how skilled his crews were. So he did not plan a straight, head-on battle. We need to understand the enemy before we can beat them, Cade said, standing before a large gathering of human and coalition officers in the war room aboard the Endless Horizon. Behind him, a massive display showed everything they knew about the Skarn Legion, gathered from coalition scout reports, captured sensor data, and analysis of the Threshold Gate battle. Their dreadnoughts are big, Cade continued, heavily armored, and carry powerful weapons. But size comes with weaknesses. Look here. He pointed to a section of the display showing engine efficiency numbers. Their ships are slow to turn, slower than anything in our fleet, and slower than most coalition ships too. They win battles by overwhelming their enemy with numbers and raw firepower, not by outmaneuvering them. So we use speed against them, Elena Voss said, understanding immediately. Exactly, Cade said. We do not meet them in open battle where their numbers matter most. We fight them the way you'd fight a much bigger, much slower opponent. We hit them, hurt them, and pull back before they can bring their full weight to bear. We make every human and coalition ship count for 3 or 4 of theirs by using better tactics, better timing, and better information. General Hallis, still grim after the losses at Threshold Gate, crossed his arms skeptically. It's a good idea in theory, Admiral, but 3,000 ships is still 3,000 ships. Even hitting and running, we will lose ships every single engagement. Eventually, the math catches up to us. You're right, Cade admitted. Which is why hit and run alone is not the whole plan. We also need to break their command structure. Coalition intelligence says their warlord, Droskale, personally commands this fleet from his flagship, the Devourer's Fist. Every report we have suggests the Skarn Legion fights with rigid top-down control. Officers wait for orders rather than thinking for themselves. If we can identify and target that flagship, cutting off command even for a short time, the rest of their fleet may hesitate, get confused, or make mistakes. That is a very dangerous plan, Admiral, Ambassador Vex said carefully. Sending ships deep into an enemy fleet of 3,000 vessels to hunt one flagship sounds like a suicide mission. It would be, Kate agreed. If we sent ships in blind. But we're not going to do that. We're going to draw the flagship out first. He tapped the display, bringing up a diagram of Halvan's system, with its asteroid belts, gas giants, and narrow approach corridors. Halvan's system has natural choke points, places where a large fleet has to slow down and organize into narrower formations to pass safely. We position our main defensive line here, at the widest approach, where the Skarn fleet will expect to fight us head-on, but we hide a strike force here, inside this asteroid field, using sensor jamming to stay hidden. When the Skarn fleet commits to the main engagement, our strike force moves through the asteroid field, using the confusion of battle as cover, and goes straight for the flagship. Elena studied the plan carefully. It's risky, sir. If the Skarn detect the strike force early, we lose our best ships for nothing. All plans are risky when you're outnumbered 10-1, Cade said. But sitting back and trading ship for ship in an open battle guarantees defeat. This plan, at least, gives us a chance. The room was quiet for a long moment as officers considered the plan, weighing its risks against its potential. Finally, High Marshal Illyra Sen spoke up. The coalition has 60 ships remaining, she said. I would like to volunteer them for the strike force. My people have already lost so much. Let us be part of striking back. Cade nodded slowly. I appreciate the offer, Marshal, but the strike force needs speed and stealth above all else. Human ships have technology your fleet has not yet had time to study. Sensor dampening systems developed after our war with the Devourer swarm. I would rather your remaining ships anchor the main defensive line, where their firepower and your crew's bravery will matter most, while our human ships, built specifically for this kind of operation, handle the strike on the flagship. Illyra considered this, clearly torn between wanting to contribute directly to the boldest part of the plan and understanding the wisdom of using each fleet where it was strongest. Very well, she finally said. The coalition fleet will hold the main line. We will not let you down, Admiral. I never doubted it, Cade said. Your people held Threshold Gate against 800 ships, with only 200 of your own. That took real courage. This war will need every bit of that courage, from both our peoples, if we're going to win it. Over the next 2 days, the combined fleet worked tirelessly to prepare. Human engineers shared what technology they safely could with coalition ships, improving their shields and sensor systems where possible. Coalition pilots and human pilots trained together in joint simulations, learning to coordinate movements and communication despite differences in ship design and language. It was not a perfect blend, two very different militaries with two very different histories, trying to become one fighting force in only 2 days. But slowly, piece by piece, it started to work. Captain Elena Voss found herself spending much of that time with a coalition pilot named Sana Threll, a young Torvain woman who had survived the battle at Threshold Gate and lost most of her old squadron in the process. Sana was quiet at first, still carrying the weight of that battle, but as the two women trained together, running simulated intercept maneuvers over and over, something like trust began to form between them. Your ships move differently than ours, Sana said during a break, watching replay footage of their latest simulation. Smoother, more controlled. Different engine design, Elena explained. We learned a lot about efficient maneuvering, fighting an enemy that could turn on a point. The Devourer swarm ships moved like living things, not machines. We had to become just as fast and unpredictable to survive. I read some of the old records your people shared with us, Sana said quietly. About that war. I am sorry. Humanity had to go through something so terrible. Elena was quiet for a moment. We don't talk about it much, even among ourselves. But I think that's part of why we're here now. We know what it feels like to face something that seems impossible to beat. We're not going to let your people go through that alone if we can help it. Sana looked at her, something like hope flickering in her dark eyes. Do you really think we can win this? 3,000 ships, Captain. That's not a number that feels beatable. Elena thought carefully before answering. I won't lie to you and say I'm certain. Nobody who's been in real combat is ever fully certain. But I believe in this plan, and I believe in the people carrying it out. Human and coalition both. That has to be enough to try. Aboard the Devourer's Fist, Warlord Dross Kale studied the approach to Halvan with growing impatience. His fleet, 3,000 dreadnoughts strong, moved steadily toward the coalition capital, crushing the last scattered resistance along the way. Reports from his forward scouts confirmed that the human fleet, along with what remained of the coalition's own forces, had gathered at Halven to make a final stand. 400 ships, Threxmorin reported, standing at attention before his warlord. That is the full combined strength of the humans and the coalition remnant, my lord. They are positioning at the main approach corridor into the system. Droskale allowed himself a low, rumbling laugh. 400 against 3,000. Even legendary humans cannot overcome numbers like that with mere skill and cleverness. Should we expect any unusual tactics, my lord? Threx asked carefully. The old stories about humanity speak of unconventional strategies, of victories against far larger enemy forces. Old stories are exactly that, Droskale said dismissively. Stories. We have satellites and scouts watching their fleet formation. It is a defensive line, nothing more, nothing clever. We will break through it exactly as we have broken through every other defense in this pathetic coalition. Bring the fleet in at standard formation. Full strength. Let these legendary humans see exactly how little their legend matters against real, overwhelming force. What Droskale did not know, and what his scouts had failed to detect, was the strike force of 40 of humanity's fastest, stealthiest ships, hidden deep within the asteroid field, just off the main approach corridor, waiting silently, engines cold, sensors dampened, for the moment to strike. The night before the battle, or what passed for night aboard a warship in deep space, Admiral Cade walked the corridors of the endless horizon, checking in on crews preparing for what many of them knew might be the last battle of their lives. He found young soldiers writing letters home, veterans quietly checking and rechecking their equipment, officers running through tactical simulations one more time, even though there was little left to refine. He stopped by the ship's small chapel, a quiet room set aside for reflection, regardless of faith, and found Elena Voss sitting alone, staring at nothing in particular. "Can't sleep?" Cade asked, sitting down beside her. "Too much on my mind," Elena admitted. "Tomorrow we're leading 40 ships through an asteroid field, into the middle of 3,000 enemy dreadnoughts, hoping to catch their flagship off guard. It's not exactly a plan built for peaceful dreams." Cade nodded, understanding completely. "I remember feeling exactly like this before the final battle against the Devourer swarm. I was younger then, barely out of officer training, terrified I would fail everyone counting on me." "How did you get through it?" Elena asked. "I reminded myself why we were fighting," Cade said. "Not for glory, not even really for victory itself, but for the people who couldn't fight for themselves, the families back home, the colonies that would be destroyed if we failed. That kind of reason carries you through fear better than anything else I've ever found." Elena thought about Sana Threll, and the Coalition pilots who had already lost so much, and the millions of people across Coalition space who were counting on this desperate plan to work. "We're doing this for them," she said quietly. "The Coalition. People we only just met, who trusted an old promise from a species they thought was nothing but a myth." "That's exactly right," Cade said. "And tomorrow, we're going to prove that some legends are worth believing in." He stood up, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Get some rest if you can, Captain. Tomorrow, humanity fights not just for the Coalition, but for the kind of galaxy we want to help build. One where the strong don't get to simply take whatever they want from the weak. That's worth fighting for. That's worth winning." Elena nodded, feeling a small measure of calm settle over her despite the fear still lingering underneath. "Yes, sir. Tomorrow, we fight." Outside the viewport, the stars burned quietly in the dark, indifferent to the storm of war approaching, unaware that within hours, the largest and most desperate battle the coalition of free worlds had ever faced would begin, and that the outcome would decide the fate of an entire region of the galaxy. 3,000 dreadnoughts were coming. 400 ships, human and coalition together, stood ready to meet them. And somewhere in the cold silence of an asteroid field, 40 human ships waited in the dark, engines cold, weapons ready, for the signal that would send them straight into the heart of the enemy fleet. The battle for Halven was about to begin. The Skarn command fleet arrived at the edge of Halven's system exactly on schedule, 3,000 dreadnoughts sliding out of hyperspace in tight, disciplined formation, their black hulls catching the pale light of Halven's distant sun. On the bridge of the Devourer's Fist, Warlord Droskale watched the sensor display fill with the tiny green dots representing the defending fleet, a mere 400 ships arranged in a defensive line across the main approach corridor. "They stand and fight," Droskale said, something like amusement in his deep voice. "Foolish, but I suppose even legends can make mistakes." "Orders, my lord?" Threxmorin asked. "Standard advance formation," Droskale said. "Let them see the full weight of what they face. Let their courage crumble before the first shot is even fired." Aboard the Endless Horizon, Admiral Cade watched the same sensor display, seeing the enormous Skarn fleet spread out before him like a wall of black steel, stretching farther than his sensors could easily measure. Beside him, Elena Voss stood at her station, having transferred command of the strike force preparations to her second, ready to lead the hidden ships into battle once the signal came. "Gods," someone on the bridge whispered, staring at the numbers. "There's so many of them." "Steady," Cade said calmly, his voice carrying through the bridge. "We knew what we were facing. Nothing on that screen has changed our plan. Hold formation. Let them come to us." The coalition fleet held the left and right flanks of the defensive line, their ships bristling with weapons, crews grim but determined after everything they had already survived. High Marshal Alira Sen commanded from her own flagship, watching the approaching enemy with a steady, practiced calm that hid the fear churning in her stomach. "All ships, hold position," she ordered over the fleet-wide comm. "Remember your training. Remember Threshold Gate. We held once. We hold again." The Skarn fleet closed the distance with slow, terrible inevitability. When they finally entered weapons range, the black dreadnoughts opened fire almost as one, a wave of energy weapons and heavy plasma cannons lighting up the dark space between the two fleets like a sudden storm. Coalition and human shields flared bright, absorbing the first devastating impacts, and the Battle of Halven had officially begun. "Return fire," Cade ordered. "Focused volleys. Target their leading ships. Do not spread our fire thin." Human and coalition weapons answered together, concentrated blasts tearing into the front line of Skarn dreadnoughts. Unlike the chaotic, overwhelming fire the enemy sent back, the defenders fired with precision, each ship targeting the same enemy vessel in turn, bringing down shields and armor faster than the Skarn gunners could react. One dreadnought exploded in a bright flash, then another, small victories against the overwhelming tide. But for every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more pressed forward, and the sheer volume of incoming fire began to take its toll. A coalition cruiser on the left flank lost its shields entirely, taking 3 direct hits before its reactor overloaded, tearing the ship apart in a silent, terrible bloom of light. Its crew of 200 souls were gone in an instant. "We're losing the left flank," a tactical officer reported urgently. "Coalition ships are taking heavy damage." "Reinforce with Group 3, Cade ordered. "Keep the line together. We need to hold long enough for the strike force." On Alira's flagship, the situation was growing desperate. Ship after ship reported damage, some pulling back for emergency repairs, others simply going silent, as they were destroyed outright. She watched the battle unfold with a growing sense of dread, wondering if even the human fleet's advanced technology would be enough to save them from being simply overwhelmed by numbers. "Marshal, we cannot hold this position much longer," her tactical officer warned. "At this rate of attrition, we'll lose half the fleet within the hour." Alira gripped the edge of her command console tightly. The humans said they had a plan. "We hold, no matter the cost. That's what we agreed to." Deep within the asteroid field flanking the main battle, Elena Voss sat in the command chair of her ship, the fast strike cruiser Silent Arrow, watching the distant flashes of battle light up the darkness beyond the asteroids. Around her, 39 other human ships waited in tense silence, engines cold, sensors dampened, invisible to Skarn detection, thanks to technology developed in the darkest days of humanity's war against the Devourer swarm. "Any word from Admiral Cade?" she asked her communications officer. "Nothing yet, Captain. We wait for the signal." Elena watched the battle data streaming in from the main fleet, watched the casualty numbers climb steadily higher, and felt the weight of every passing minute. She trusted the plan. She trusted Cade's judgment. But watching ships die while she sat hidden and waiting tested every bit of that trust. "Come on," she whispered under her breath. "Commit your flagship, Warlord. Give us the opening we need. On the Devourer's fist, Droskale watched the battle with growing satisfaction. The defending fleet was crumbling under the weight of his numbers, exactly as he had predicted. Ship after coalition ship fell, and even the mysterious human vessels, despite fighting with impressive skill and precision, were beginning to show cracks in their formation. Their line is weakening, my lord, Threxmoran reported. Shall we commit the full fleet reserve to break through completely? Droskale considered this for a moment. Standard doctrine would say to hold the reserve back, to commit gradually and maintain control. But he was growing impatient, eager to crush this defense entirely and move on to conquering the rest of coalition space. Commit the reserve, he ordered. Bring the Devourer's fist forward as well. I want to be present when this legendary human fleet finally breaks. It was a decision born of overconfidence, the kind of mistake that came from facing an enemy who had, until this moment, never given him reason to doubt his own overwhelming strength. As the Devourer's fist began moving forward, joining the main battle line instead of remaining safely in the rear, sensors aboard the Silent Arrow picked up the change immediately. Captain, the enemy flagship is moving forward, the sensor officer called out excitedly. It's committing to the main battle line, leaving its rear escort thinner than before. Elena's heart raced. This was it, the opening they had been waiting for. Signal Admiral Cade, she said. Tell him the flagship has moved. We're ready to strike. A moment later, a coded transmission came back from the endless horizon, brief but clear. Strike Force, you are cleared to engage. Go get their warlord, Captain. Cade out. Elena turned to her crew, feeling a surge of adrenaline and determination replace the nervous waiting of the past hour. All ships, this is Silent Arrow. Strike Force, follow my lead. Full engines, stay in formation. We go straight for that flagship. For the coalition, for everyone counting on us. 40 human ships surged out from the cover of the asteroid field, engines flaring bright as they abandoned stealth for speed, cutting through the chaos of battle at an angle no Skarn sensor operator expected. They moved fast, faster than anything the Skarn had encountered before, weaving between wreckage and weapons fire, heading straight for the rear flank of the Devourer's fist. Back at the main battle line, the sudden appearance of 40 fast-moving human ships tearing through the Skarn formation caused immediate confusion among the enemy fleet. Skarn officers, trained to wait for orders from their warlord rather than think independently, hesitated, unsure how to respond to ships moving with such speed and precision through their own ranks. What in the depths is that? Threxmoran demanded, staring at his own sensor display in confusion as the human strike force cut through his formation like a blade through soft flesh. Unknown fast attack group, coming from the asteroid field, a sensor officer reported urgently. They are bypassing our main line entirely. Trajectory suggests, my lord, they are heading directly for us. Droskale's confidence cracked for the first time since the battle began. Turn the fleet. Concentrate defensive fire on that attack group immediately. But his order came too late. Skarn dreadnoughts, built for raw power rather than quick maneuvering, struggled to reposition fast enough to intercept the human strike force. Ship after Skarn escort vessel fired wildly, missing the fast-moving human ships as they weaved and dodged with practiced precision, technology and training honed over generations of hard-won experience. Captain, we are approaching the flagship's outer defense perimeter, the Silent Arrow's tactical officer reported. Escort ships moving to intercept. Punch through, Elena ordered. Concentrated fire, clear us a path. We are not stopping now. The strike force fought with desperate intensity, human weapons tearing into the surprised Skarn escort ships, clearing a narrow but bloody path toward the massive form of the Devourer's fist itself. They lost 2 ships in the process, brave crews who gave everything to keep the strike force moving forward, their sacrifice not wasted, as the remaining 38 ships broke through the last line of defense and found themselves finally within striking range of the enemy flagship. All ships, target the flagship's engine section and command tower, Elena ordered. Everything we've got, fire. Human weapons, precise and devastating, tore into the Devourer's fist from close range, striking exactly where its armor was weakest, exactly where its shields had been stretched thin, trying to defend against the sudden attack. Explosions rippled across the massive flagship's hull, and for the first time in the battle, alarm and confusion swept through the entire Skarn command fleet as their leader's own ship came under direct, brutal assault. Aboard the Devourer's Fist, Dross Kale felt his ship shudder violently under the impact of human weapons fire, consoles sparking, crew members thrown from their stations by the force of the explosions. "Status report!" he roared. "Engine section critically damaged, my lord. Command tower shields failing. We are losing power across multiple decks." For the first time in his long, brutal career of conquest, Warlord Dross Kale felt something close to genuine fear. The legend of humanity, the myth he had so easily dismissed only days before, was tearing his flagship apart from the inside of his own formation, striking with a precision and boldness he had never encountered from any enemy before. "All ships converge on my position," he bellowed into the fleet-wide comm. "Protect the flagship, immediately!" But his order, meant to bring order back to the chaotic Skarn formation, instead caused even greater confusion. Dreadnoughts across the fleet began turning inward, breaking their own attacking formation against the main coalition and human defensive line to rush toward their stricken flagship, creating gaps and openings that the defenders on the main battle line were quick to exploit. "Their formation is breaking," Cade shouted from the bridge of the endless horizon, watching the sudden shift in the Skarn fleet's movements with fierce satisfaction. "All ships, press the advantage. Push forward, now." Human and coalition ships surged forward together, striking at the confused and disorganized Skarn fleet with renewed strength, cutting down dreadnoughts that only minutes before had seemed like an unstoppable, overwhelming force. The tide of battle, which had seemed so hopelessly against them just an hour before, began to turn. The legend of humanity, doubted and dismissed as myth by an enemy who believed only in numbers and raw power, had just proven itself very, very real. But the battle was far from over, and Warlord Dross Kale, wounded and enraged aboard his crippled flagship, was not yet ready to accept defeat. Smoke and fire filled the corridors of the Devourer's Fist, as damage control crews fought desperately to keep the massive flagship together. Warlord Dross Kale stood on his ruined bridge, half the consoles dark, sparks raining down from a shattered ceiling panel, and felt a rage unlike anything he had experienced in centuries of conquest. "Status of the fleet," he demanded, his voice a low growl of barely controlled fury. "Chaos, my lord," Threxmoran reported, blood running down the side of his face from a cut he hadn't noticed yet. "Nearly a third of our ships broke formation to come to our defense, leaving gaps in our main line. The humans and coalition forces are pushing through those gaps, destroying isolated ships before they can regroup." Dross Kale's claws dug into the edge of his command console. He had commanded fleets for 300 years, conquered dozens of worlds, and never once faced a defeat like the one unfolding around him now. And it had all started because he underestimated an old story he never believed was true. "We still outnumber them by more than 5-1, he snarled. "Rally the fleet, reform our lines, this battle is not lost." "My lord," Threx said carefully, "our own escort ships have taken heavy losses defending the flagship. If we do not withdraw the Devourer's Fist to safety, we risk losing you, and with you, the last unified command of this entire invasion force." Dross Kale stared out at the chaos beyond his viewport, at Skarn dreadnoughts burning and dying in numbers he had never imagined possible against such a smaller enemy force. Pride told him to stay, to fight, to prove that raw strength would still win in the end. But 300 years of conquest had taught him one lesson above all others. A warlord who dies in battle cannot lead a second conquest. "Withdraw the flagship to the rear," he finally ordered, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "But signal every remaining ship, regroup, hold formation, and resume the attack. We will not be broken by a single clever trick and a handful of ships." Aboard the endless horizon, Admiral Cade watched the Skarn fleet's chaotic movements with careful attention, noting the flagship pulling back toward the rear of the formation, while the rest of the fleet attempted, slowly, to reorganize. "They're regrouping," Elena Voss reported, having safely guided the surviving Strike Force ships back toward the main fleet after their daring assault on the Devourer's Fist. "The flagship survived, but it's badly damaged and pulling back. Fleet cohesion is still weak, but it won't stay that way forever. Good work out there, Captain, Cade said. That strike bought us exactly the opening we needed. Now we need to press the advantage before they can fully recover. He turned to the fleet-wide comm, addressing every human and coalition ship still fighting in the chaotic battle. All forces, this is Admiral Cade. The enemy flagship has been damaged and withdrawn. Their fleet cohesion is broken. This is our moment. Concentrate fire on isolated enemy groups. Do not let them reform their lines. Push forward, together, and let's finish what we started. High Marshal Alira Sen, watching her own surviving coalition ships regroup after the brutal early hours of battle, felt a surge of renewed hope at Cade's words. You heard the Admiral, she called to her fleet. For every world the Skarn Legion has destroyed, for every colony they've enslaved, we push forward, now. The combined human and coalition fleet surged into the disorganized Skarn formation with renewed energy, striking at scattered groups of dreadnoughts before they could regroup into their usual overwhelming, disciplined mass. Where before the Skarn had relied on sheer numbers and coordinated firepower to crush anything in their path, they now found themselves fighting piecemeal, small groups against small groups, and in those more even engagements, human tactics and coalition determination began to make a real difference. Ship by ship the battle turned. Skarn dreadnoughts that had seemed unstoppable only hours before now found themselves outmaneuvered, outgunned in localized skirmishes, and picked apart by an enemy fighting smarter, not just harder. It was not an easy victory, far from it. Human and coalition ships continued to take losses throughout the long, grueling hours of continued fighting, but with every passing hour, the balance shifted further in the defenders' favor. By the time the battle finally reached its climax, nearly 10 hours after the first shots had been fired, the once mighty Skarn command fleet had been reduced to scattered, disorganized remnants, fleeing back toward the edge of the system, in a desperate bid to escape complete destruction. Of the 3,000 dreadnoughts that had arrived at Halven with such overwhelming confidence, barely 400 remained combat-capable, the rest destroyed, crippled, or forced to retreat. Aboard the badly damaged Devourer's Fist, Warlord Dross Kale watched the retreat of his once invincible fleet, with a bitterness that ran deeper than any wound he had suffered in the battle itself. He had come to conquer a small, scattered alliance of weak species, only to be humiliated by a fleet a tenth the size of his own, led by a species he had dismissed as nothing more than an old, exaggerated legend. My lord, Threx Morin said quietly, approaching with the latest casualty reports. Our losses are severe. We should withdraw the remaining fleet entirely, regroup at our staging point beyond coalition space. Dross Kale said nothing for a long moment, staring at the wreckage of his ambitions scattered across the star map before him. Signal the retreat, he finally said, his voice hollow. All remaining ships withdraw from coalition space immediately. As the shattered remains of the Skarn command fleet fled Halven's system, word spread quickly across the rest of the Skarn invasion force, still scattered across a dozen different coalition systems. Without their central command fleet to support them, and with reports of humanity's arrival, and the devastating defeat of their warlord's own flagship spreading fear through their ranks, group after group of Skarn raiders began their own retreats, abandoning conquered worlds and pulling back toward the safety of their distant home territory. In the aftermath of the battle, the war room on Halven, once filled with fear and desperation, now buzzed with a mixture of exhausted relief and quiet celebration. High Marshal Alira Sen stood before the star map, watching the retreating Skarn fleet finally leave coalition space entirely, and felt tears she had been holding back for days finally begin to fall. We held, she said softly. We actually held. Ambassador Vex Taloran stood beside her, equally overwhelmed. The old stories were true after all, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. Humanity truly is everything the legends claimed, and more. Aboard the endless horizon, Admiral Cade walked slowly through the ship's corridors, checking on wounded crew members, offering quiet words of comfort and pride to those who had fought so bravely through the long, terrible battle. The cost had been high, dozens of human ships lost, hundreds of crew members gone, and the coalition fleet reduced to a mere handful of surviving vessels. But Halven still stood. The coalition of free worlds still existed, saved from complete destruction by a promise made 2 centuries ago, and honored at exactly the moment it mattered most. He found Elena Voss on the observation deck, staring out at the stars, the same view she had studied so anxiously the night before the battle began. "We did it," Cade said, standing beside her. "We did," Elena agreed, though exhaustion colored her voice. "At a terrible cost, but we did it." "That's how every real victory feels," Cade said gently. "The stories our grandparents told us about the war against the Devourer swarm never mentioned how heavy victory feels when you're the one who has to carry the cost of it home." Elena nodded, thinking of the crews lost during the desperate strike on the Devourer's fist, of Sana Threll and the other coalition pilots who had fought so bravely beside humanity, despite having every reason to believe they might be facing their final battle. "What happens now?" she asked. "The Skarn Legion is retreating, but they're not destroyed. They could come back." "They could," Cade admitted. "But today, we sent them a message they won't soon forget. Humanity is not a myth to be dismissed, and the coalition of free worlds is not weak or alone. If the Skarn Legion ever considers returning, they'll know exactly what waits for them." He turned to face her fully, a small, tired smile crossing his weathered face. "And more importantly, today humanity proved something to itself, something we needed to remember, after 200 years of hiding away, healing from our own old wounds. We proved that we can still stand for something bigger than ourselves, that the promises we make actually mean something." In the weeks that followed, humanity's return to the wider galaxy sent shockwaves through every corner of known space. News of the battle at Halven spread quickly, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees who had witnessed firsthand the incredible turning of a battle that should have been an impossible defeat. The old stories, once dismissed as myth and legend, were suddenly being told again with renewed belief, and a new chapter was added to them. The day humanity returned, to save an alliance of strangers who had once, long ago, shown them kindness. The coalition of free worlds formally established new diplomatic relations with humanity. The old treaty from 2 centuries past updated and renewed into a full alliance between the two powers. Human engineers began helping coalition worlds rebuild what the Skarn Legion had destroyed, while coalition diplomats worked to introduce humanity properly to the wider galactic community, a community that had spent 2 centuries wondering if the old legends were even true. High Marshal Elira Sen was promoted to lead the newly formed Joint Defense Council, a combined human and coalition military command structure designed to ensure that no threat, whether the Skarn Legion or something even worse lurking in the dark corners of the galaxy, would ever again catch either side unprepared. Warlord Dross Kale, meanwhile, retreated to what remained of Skarn territory, his reputation shattered, his once invincible command fleet reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Word of his humiliating defeat spread even among his own people, and whispers began to circulate of rivals eager to challenge his leadership. The Skarn Legion, for now, was no longer a threat to the coalition of free worlds, but everyone involved in that terrible, desperate battle understood that the galaxy was a large and dangerous place, and that this would likely not be the last threat either humanity or the coalition would face together. Aboard the Endless Horizon, as the human fleet prepared for the long journey back to Sol System, Admiral Marcus Cade stood once more on the observation deck, watching Halven's system grow smaller in the distance. Beside him, Elena Voss and a small delegation of coalition officers, including Ambassador Vex Taloran and Sana Threll, had gathered to say their farewells. "Thank you," Vex said simply, extending a hand in the human gesture he had learned over the past weeks, "for answering our call, for proving that some legends are worth every bit of belief we place in them." Cade shook his hand firmly. "Thank your ancestors, Ambassador. It was their kindness to a broken, desperate species 200 years ago that made this alliance possible today. We simply kept our word." "Will you return?" Sana asked Elena. "If the Skarn Legion, or something else, ever threatens the coalition again?" Elena smiled, a genuine, warm expression despite the exhaustion still lingering from the long battle behind them. "Humanity does not abandon its friends," she said. "We'll be here, whenever you need us. That's a promise." As the human fleet finally turned toward home, leaving behind a coalition that would never again doubt the old stories about a distant, quiet species called humanity, Admiral Cade allowed himself a rare, satisfied smile. The galaxy had learned an important lesson today, one that would echo through history for generations to come. Humanity had been called a legend, a myth, a story told to frighten enemies and comfort the desperate. But legends, it turned out, could still answer when called upon. And on the day 10,000 enemy dreadnoughts threatened to erase an entire alliance from existence, humanity had proven once and for all that some legends were simply waiting for the right moment to become real again. The war was not truly over. The galaxy remained a vast, dangerous, and unpredictable place, filled with threats both known and unknown. But for the first time in 200 years, humanity had stepped back onto the galactic stage, not as a forgotten myth hiding in the shadows, but as a proud, capable ally, ready to stand beside those who needed them most. And somewhere in the depths of space, as the endless horizon and its fleet turned toward the long journey home, the story of the Battle of Halven began its own journey, spreading from world to world, growing into a new legend that would inspire hope in anyone who ever again found themselves facing impossible odds. Because sometimes, against every expectation, legends really do come true.